Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be starting a brand new series on Aristotle's Poetics. Now, Aristotle's Poetics is arguably the most influential and widely debated work of aesthetics within the world of theater and literature. However, it is also one of Aristotle's most confusing and unclear works, as it is largely just gathered from collections of his lecture notes and doesn't kind of have the same through line. It is a very, very short book that is quite easy to read. So if you're interested in this, I'd encourage you to kind of read along with the chapters of it as we go through this series to get a bit of a sense of the original text as well. So, Aristotle's Poetics tries to catalog different kinds of literature into various categories to discover kind of the purpose, or the telos or final cause in Aristotle's terms, of each of those categories, and the best way to achieve that final cause. It also attempts to catalog different plot devices and tropes used in literature and theater of the time. It can be considered, in many ways, the first kind of documented attempt at the work done today by both highbrow literary criticism, as well as the work done by a website like TV Tropes, in terms of documenting the different tropes that exist in film and storytelling. So, these two kind of dual missions are a little bit at odds within this piece of both critiquing and trying to come up with the correct way to do literature and criticism, as well as documenting and describing what exists. And there's a little bit of ambiguity sometimes when Aristotle is saying something as to whether he means this is what you should do or just this is what is done. Now, when looking at Aristotle's Poetics, there are a couple of important points to understand. First, Aristotle was writing in a time when the categories of different kinds of writing, history versus literature versus epic poems versus plays, were not clearly delimited. Woo! Many works mixed fiction and nonfiction, entertainment and persuasion, comedy and tragedy freely. And arguably, we've kind of moved past some of those strict rules and do some of that today as well. But there weren't these kind of strong conceptions of what it was for something to be fiction or nonfiction or comedy or tragedy to begin with. So he is going to have to do a little bit of the hard work of actually splitting apart some of those concepts. What does it mean for something to be a comedy versus a tragedy? And it's also important to remember with this, when he uses the term poetry, it applies really broadly to what we might consider literature, plays, and poems alike, as well as some works of history. Second, Aristotle, being the philosopher of the concrete particular, as opposed to Plato, which we'll get to in a sec, was looking at the instances of literature available to him, which were quite few compared to the wide range of literature that we have access to today. While Aristotle, of course, had access to many more of the Greek plays that have since been lost, we currently have access to not only the entire history of plays and literature and television and all these things, but all of the current existent instances of these things. And so when he's talking about it, he's really looking at such a small frame of reference compared to what we can look at today. Therefore, while it can and has been taken kind of to be proscriptive, as this is how you should do theater, this is how you should tell stories, it can also be seen in the frame of a review of ancient Greek drama that simply documents the trends in storytelling of the time. Similar, as I said, to kind of a TV tropes or something that documents the tropes, not necessarily something that says the right way to do things. And this is important and useful to classicists because much of that is lost to us today. So, take that with a grain of salt. Of some of the things he's talking about here can be taken and have been taken as proscriptive, but many of them may also just be kind of thought of as a description of ancient theater. The series is going to consist of 12 short videos following this one, which each focus on a single concept in Aristotle's Poetics. We're going to kind of try to cut it down to really short videos and spread them out, so if you're looking for just an individual concept, you don't have to sort through one long video. We won't cover some of the concepts that are solely applicable to ancient Greek, such as Aristotle's opinions on diction, but we're going to focus on those ideas such as kind of the unity of plot and catharsis, which have really stood the test of time, and which we can see the influences of in even modern literature and drama. So, First off, we're going to look at the background, who Aristotle's responding to. We'll look at why Plato hates poets. Then, once we get a sense of who Aristotle's responding to, we'll look at Aristotle's case for poetry in response to Plato, and kind of what the disagreement they have there is. Plato famously did not like the poets, did not like the theater, thought it was a bad thing for society. Aristotle, being the rebellious student he was, took the opposite approach. Then we'll look at what is mimesis, kind of the central techne that we're looking at here. Then we'll take a look at Aristotle's mediums of art. So there's 3 ways that Aristotle distinguishes different kinds of art. The first one is mediums. The second one is comedy versus tragedy. This is the object of the art. And then we'll look at the origins of theater, or the manner of representation. So, then we'll take a look at Aristotle's elements of tragedy. So within the Poetics, Aristotle focuses down on tragedy specifically and kind of what makes a good tragedy. So we'll look at his different elements that make up the correct way to do tragedy. Then we will look at the infamous unities in drama, which really are a feature of French neoclassicism, but are attributed to Aristotle sufficiently that we do need to talk about them. Then we will look at the tragic figure and what Aristotle thought a good tragic figure, a good central figure in a tragedy should be. Then we will look at reversal and recognition, 2 key elements of the plot that Aristotle thought were important and essential to a good complex plot for a tragedy. Then we will take a look at what is catharsis, one of the terms that has had a very long-lasting impact on our ideas of storytelling and the theater, and comes originally from Aristotle's Poetics. And finally, we will take a look at another term that comes from the Poetics. What is deus ex machina? Or what is God from the machine? So, with that, stay tuned for our upcoming video on why Plato hates poets. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.